So we just wanted to do some intros. We'll do some staff intros, and then we can do some participant intros in the chat. But first, just wanting to acknowledge that Solid Ground operates on land that has always belonged to the Coast Salish and Duwamish peoples. As a modern nonprofit, we are part of that system of colonialism that stole their land, attempted genocide, and continues to oppress Indigenous people. And it's something that we are trying to just always acknowledge and do better on, and have actually like good and authentic relationships with the Duwamish and other tribes in the area. And we also wanted to acknowledge that much of this country, including its culture and economic development and wealth, have been made possible by forced labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants, who suffered and continue to suffer Jim Crow laws, slavery, the war on drugs, and the continuance of state-sanctioned violence. And we are indebted to their labor and undue sacrifice, and just wanted to acknowledge the impacts of those violence throughout the last 500 years and the resulting trauma that still exists today. One of the things we'll be talking about today is that our food system and our country is built on stolen land and stolen labor. So just wanting to ground us in that. So we'll do some intros. For staff, we'll do our name, our pronoun, and our role at Solid Ground. And I can start. I'm Shayna. I use she and her pronouns, and I work in the community food education program as the volunteer and outreach coordinator. And I will pass it to Scott.
That's me. I'm Scott. I use he, him pronouns. Work at Solid Ground as our farm coordinator down at Mara Farm. And I will pass it over to Maya.
Hi everyone, I'm Maya. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the youth education coordinator on the community food education team at Solid Ground. I'll pass it to Gina.
Hey y'all, I'm Gina. I use she, her pronouns. I am the partnerships coordinator on the community food education team. Happy to be here.
Cool. And feel free to keep adding to it. I am going to go into our next section, which is just sharing our agenda. And so we wanted to do some introductions, which we are kind of in the middle of. We'll spend the first kind of third talking about the dominant narratives of the alternative food movement. We'll take a break, and then we'll talk about some BIPOC-led food and farm futures. We'll talk about two different places. And then we're going to actually spend some time. We've gotten feedback in the past that people wanted more time to kind of think about how to change these systems. And so we'll have some time to kind of brainstorm together some action items, and we'll do some of that in breakout groups too. So this is by no means like an intensive deep dive into this topic, but just kind of wanting to start this conversation. In a similar vein, some of our group agreements that we have for most of our events are just accepting that this is not the end all be all. This is non-closure. There's not going to be like a tidy end to the topic at the end of the event. Acknowledging that learning is an ongoing process. So we'll try to share out resources at the end for your continued learning. Wanting to just name that intent and impact are different. So the way that you mean something might not be the way that it lands on someone, and just wanting to take ownership if something that like lands a different way than you meant it to. Always centering anything involving race and anti-racism and the fact that the experiences of people who experience racism are real, and we are not really like putting that into question. And then just the classic for Zoom, we are on a virtual platform, so it often happens that there's going to be accidental interruptions. So just that's totally fine, and we're going to just try to practice some patience with each other. And I will pass it to Gina to share a little bit about who is Solid Ground.
All right, thanks. So I think many of you already know about Solid Ground, but I just want to orient ourselves in this event, so I'll keep it short and simple. Solid Ground combines direct service with advocacy to meet basic needs, nurture success, and spread change. Through our direct service programs, we people gain stability and build skills that equip them to move through their lives. And through advocacy, we work to end racism and other oppressions embedded in our institutions, policies, and culture that hold people back from success. We bring the voices of people experiencing poverty into the political process to further social justice and support our entire community to reach their potential. We host these quarterly opportunities because volunteers have asked for more learning spaces, so here we go. And I think a lot of us have been on Zoom already, so I'm just gonna go over some very basic reminders of some of the norms that we expect today. let's see here. We really want to encourage folks to have their videos on, even though they may not be talking much, and we understand if you cannot. We really want to feel like we're all here together to kind of create that space together, and to really remember to mute yourself when you're not talking, to cut down on the ambiance sounds, the noise in the area, and to remember to unmute yourself when you do want to talk. We will have various moments throughout this event where you will be able to speak and share. Otherwise, feel free to enter what you have to say in the chat. I think the few of us here will be monitoring the chat together.
Cool, thanks, Gina. One thing just for Zoom that I meant to say before too is just that there is the ability to have subtitles. So if you would like to use the subtitles, they're at the bottom kind of main bar of Zoom, and it should be able to say closed captioning. So they are auto-generated, so they're not the best subtitles, but if that's something that would be helpful for you, those should be on there as well. Cool, so we are going to talk about what are some of the dominant narratives of the alternative food movement. So the first thing I wanted to just like start off with is a brainstorm, and we can answer this in the chat. You're welcome to unmute and answer out loud. And Gina is actually going to help us populate some of these kind of concepts and images into Mural, but you're welcome to do it directly too, and I'll share the link again. But what do you picture when you hear the word farmer or farm? Like what kind of imagery comes to mind?
Shana, do you want to screen share the mural?
Oh yeah, are you able to do that, Gina?
I can
thought that's what
populate
you
it
were
on my phone.
Oh, right. Sorry, Gina. Okay, I will screen share the mural. It probably makes sense that you're not able to populate it either, which I can also do.
Populate it. I'm just not.
You can populate it?
Yeah, I'm not on Zoom
Okay.
on my phone.
Yes, totally. Yeah, we're all having some tech difficulties today. So yeah, I can definitely do that. Let me just close the share page. Okay, I will go to that. So if you wanted to click the link that Scott shared in the chat, you're welcome to actually use that sidebar and post a picture of yourself directly of what you picture. You're welcome to even like click the pencil on the bottom of the sidebar and draw a picture if you want. Or you're welcome to double click to create a post-it and put words in. But one of the best ways too is just to unmute and tell us what you think. And yeah, what kind of comes to mind when you picture farming or farmers?
I picture somebody with a hoe hoeing either weeds or, you know, in a row, working that way with vegetables.
Someone with the hoe, yeah, definitely. I feel like that's a hoe or like a pitchfork or that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, what else do people think of?
I think of someone who's tired.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just tired today, but I fatigue and like sun scorching, sweat, hard work.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we kind of wanted to talk about today is just that like farming is really hard work. It's like hard on the body. It's not really that glamorous. It's really hard work. I see someone put in the chat wearing hats, layers to cover all skin. Land, farm workers who deserve workers' rights. Absolutely. I see some more pictures coming in. Feel free to unmute too. See rows of green, low wages. Oh. Can wait for a couple more too. Just want to make sure we have a lot of different kind of ideas. Yeah, land owned by many generations of the same family. Family farms. White people trying to live off the grid, absolutely. That kind of like back to the land concept. Cool, and we can do like one or two more just to give people time to share. And you're welcome to include things too, like what are images that you saw or heard growing up? What are images that you kind of like learned more about recently? Like, are those the same? Are those different? Yes, farm in Seattle. Yes, absolutely. The Ocean Spray commercial. Can you share more about that? Is that the cranberry commercial? I see Ari put in the chat, awkward tan lines. Gina, if you want to add a picture of the farmer's tan, that's always a great call. Jacqueline wrote that she pictures hard work, veggies, animals, and seeds. Cool. Well, feel free to keep adding. Oh, great tan line pick. I see monoculture, bounty of goods. So it sounds like there's actually a lot of really different things that come to mind. You know, there's like, I see a couple people wrote hard work, low wages, tired, kind of getting at some of that fatigue. Farm workers who don't have workers' rights. So that's one thing that we talked about in one of our first volunteer continue learning events, was about workers in the food system and how to have better solidarity with food system workers. But food and farm workers are often excluded from a lot of different labor practices. So the United States, you know, we have a lot of, I mean, not a lot, but some labor protections, and two of the main groups that are excluded are farm workers and domestic workers, which are disproportionately immigrants and people of color. So that's definitely something to fight for a better food system. I feel like that's kind of one example. There are a lot of people of color who work in the food system, and it's very grueling and a lot of different, like, it's a very intense job. And then I also see the comment that says white people trying to live off the grid. And I feel like those, at least in my mind, are different, kind of bring different images. Cool. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Feel free to keep adding to it though. But one of the things that we kind of wanted to talk about are like getting at what our conceptions are and getting at what is the reality. Are those the same? Are those different? So I know that, like, for me at least, I'll speak from my own experience. Growing up, I feel like I thought of farmers and farming as like one kind of thing, like a smiling farmer, maybe wearing some overalls, straw hat, and just kind of like, maybe there's a family farm, but usually like an older white man, or maybe it was like one cow in a pasture or something like that. And then as I kind of learned more about the food system, realized that like most farm labor is very grueling, very exploitative. Also, like when there are, you know, animals involved, they're not out on a pasture all the time. They're often confined to different places, but that there's just not one way to kind of picture farming. And so I feel like you all did a really good job of kind of having different images and concepts of what farming is and what it looks like. One of the things we kind of wanted to talk about today is that many of us were kind of fed some images of farming and narratives that kind of paint a picture of this like romantic agrarian past. It's very pastoral, very quaint and bucolic, but that's not really what the reality is for a lot of people. Like I mentioned before, a lot of farm workers are people of color, especially immigrants of color. There aren't worker protections, and that's because of racism and other oppressions too. And the dominant kind of white voices of the alternative food movement really romanticize this agrarian past that appeals to white Americans in a different way than it would appeal or not appeal to Black and Indigenous and other people of color. So for many Black and Indigenous and other people of color, relationships with land are really complicated. the United States was founded on stolen land, like we mentioned before, and stolen labor, colonization, assimilation, internment, forced prison labor, and like exploitative migratory labor. And there's just a lot of different relationships of the land. Obviously, farming doesn't really belong to any group of people specifically. Like every single group of people in every place and every time have worked the land in different ways and have different relationships with the land. But just wanting to acknowledge that like there is some trauma around land and labor. And one of the things we wanted to name really specifically was that a lot of the time, these voices of BIPOC, of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and narratives can be really harmful because it kind of can discourage people, especially kids and youth, from not really feeling like they're part of this, that this is not meant to help them, and that this movement is not for them, because it's kind of not. Like it was something that was kind of popularized without the voices of people of color. So we wanted to kind of name that. I wanted to ask people, is anyone familiar, and you're welcome to like raise your hand or share in the chat, but is anyone familiar with any of the like kind of dominant voices of the alternative food movement from the early 2000s? Like, did anyone read The Omnivore's Dilemma or kind of learn about like Michael Pollan or Eric Schlosser or Alice Waters? I see some nodding. And this is not meant to be shade at those people specifically. I see Carla's holding up a Michael Pollan book right now. And not wanting to be like, we're not naming those people to say like these people are bad or anything like that, but just saying like these people are all white activists and became famous for these ideas around food in a way that like the quickness of their fame is linked to their experience of whiteness and privilege. But their ideas were really cool and really powerful for sure, but they weren't really new ideas. They were really a rebrand of generations old growing traditions, especially indigenous land practices that kind of predate conventional farming, because conventional farming in our food system is just a very much like rooted in colonialism. And so just kind of wanting to root ourselves in the fact that like so much of what the white narrative of health is kind of been co-opted by white people without crediting or acknowledging BIPOC in those spaces. So if you think of Seattle, for example, you know, farmers markets in Seattle are a very, very white space, even though markets have existed everywhere. Outdoor food markets currently exist and have existed everywhere throughout all time. But there's something about like white people kind of thinking like, oh, we've discovered this idea, we're going to do this because people are trying to go back to this other kind of idea. I feel like I'm kind of all over the place right now, but we wanted to kind of talk about that. The next thing I just wanted to share is just that the dominant narrative and the alternative food movement uses a really colorblind lens. So it assumes, kind of like all of white supremacy, that the values of whiteness are universal. Like, of course, everyone wants a farmer's market in the neighborhood or something like that. And so those things are kind of thought of as being objectively good and inherently to strive for. I'm wondering if anyone has any, and you're welcome to answer out loud or in the chat, but any like phrases you may have heard during that time. So I saw that someone put on the mural earlier, like white people going off the grid. And I think I said like the back to the land movement and concept, or like, if only people knew where their food came from. Like, have you ever heard any kind of like overly simplified phrases about food that don't really acknowledge dynamics of power? Yeah, we need to reconnect kids with the land, definitely.
Pick a diet, any diet.
Pick a diet, any diet. Yeah. The term good food in general. Real food, clean eating. Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about in our cooking and nutrition classes that we lead is that we really try to kind of recognize that like a lot of ideas of what is healthy is really rooted in like a white kind of concept of health. I also see vote with your fork, grow your own. Also kind of like the ways that these things kind of show up with fatphobia, definitely We kind of dove more into that in one of our events of just talking about like the way that like fatphobia is really rooted in colonialism too, like the ways that kind of fatphobia and diet culture erupted as this kind of like colonial and capitalist concept. Yeah, see, veganism is the best environmental option. That's definitely rooted in whiteness and white supremacy. So yeah, those are all really good. Or not, they're actually not really good. They're really accurate for what I was trying to bring up to mind. But these phrases are often really like overly simplified and don't really acknowledge these dynamics of power, especially with around like food access and race and class. And the alternative movement has historically not really acknowledged structural racism, especially like the things that led to like Black and Indigenous land dispossession, discrimination, lack of access to land in general. It also does not center Black and Indigenous and other people of color who are working in the food movement as activists and as like people working to make it a better system. It's usually kind of centering white farmers and white activists. So some of the resources we'll send out are some of our favorite food activists of color that we really wanted to spotlight. We wanted to kind of center that like we can't create a better food system without addressing structural racism in the food system, even in like this alternative food movement. And we can't think of racism and racial equity as an afterthought. And so kind of wanting to like, I feel like I just kind of did a little bit of a information dump on you, but what are some like, have you seen this before? Like, are there any examples that you can think of that have been like white dominant ideas of health, white dominant ideas of like what a good food system is? And also if you want to share like what in your opinion would be a good food system, and we can maybe share for a couple minutes and then we will kind of transition to the next thing. But what do people kind of think about that? Like, have you seen this before?
Can I actually do it with my voice?
Yes, please, of course.
Yes, it's actually very interesting, all the things you're saying. Growing up in Mexico, for me, the farmers were kind of different from coming here to America and other parts of the world too. Then I worked also at Chepanese, the restaurant that is owned by Alice Waters, and I met her. And I met also some other people, yet I always was curious about the farmer, you know, himself, herself, the ones doing the work at the land. And my experience also with a lot of people working in the farms is a lot of them don't even know how to read or write, that are coming to work in the land here in the US. So when you mentioned Michael Pollan, I went to the Benaroya Hall when he came to talk about his book. And I was there and I was thinking, who? I mean, I get all the people here in the Benaroya Hall have read the book, maybe 90%. I'm kind of curious about the big bulk of people who actually do the actual farming job that have never read the book or don't even know this person exists. So I started to go into my kind of like thinking, and I'm seeing that often, that I meet farmers that they don't even know who Michael Pollan is or Alice Waters. So it's a very strange world for me to see how famous these people are, but it's very much in just one group of people that make them famous and continue buying their books and continue growing their fame, which, you know, they're, like you said, their message is really wonderful. But I'm more worried about the bulk that haven't, or they don't have that access to that information, you know, and they are actually the ones working the land.
Right, and like really kind of solutions to, like those solutions to a good food system should be led by the people working in the food system and the people most impacted by food insecurity. And it's not like it sounds like what you're saying is like, there's
Sorry,
not, oh, go ahead.
No, I just go to I just I just probably didn't have a very straightforward message there, but I just did some rambling. Yeah, on my
No,
thoughts.
that was really, I think, I thought it was really helpful personally of just sharing, like, there's kind of this, like, the idea of like nothing about us without us. Like Michael Pollan and other people are kind of talking about the food system, but they're not the ones most directly impacted by the like inequities that are baked into the food system. And so, at least for me, what you were saying, it really, it makes me think of just like always centering the people that are most impacted.
Yes, I'm more interested in the people who are most impacted and the people who haven't read the book, or people who don't know how to read and write, so they will never have access to reading the book. That's for me kind of where I get kind of frustrated with this food sort of system that has become a trend.
Absolutely. I also wanted to just draw attention to the chat where Ari wrote that they farmed for 6 years on organic farms, and healthy food is not necessarily the same. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's being produced by a healthy workplace. And Cameron wrote that he also agrees, but just that what's good for a worker, like a lot of I don't know exactly know. I feel like I just wanted to say, like, I really wanted to bring that point to the front too, because if we are just fighting for, you know, organic and healthy food, but we're not acknowledging the workers, we're really missing a huge part of the equation. That's not going to make the food system that we all deserve. And then Ari shared a little bit more that in Canada, the organic standards aren't really specific about worker housing and treatment, and it's definitely not that much better in the United States. I know during COVID, there were a lot of issues where like people were, you know, housed on the farm, and like so many people in a house could not distance. And so COVID rates were really high among farm workers and other food system workers because worker protections are so bad. I just kind of wanted to center that. I also, oh yeah, go ahead.
We had the same thing in Canada. I know everyone, like, at least in the States, it seems like in the media, everyone's like, oh, Canada, but it's like literally like, even on organic farms, like we have the seasonal agriculture worker program in Canada, and it's like hella fucking abusive. And there have been so many cases where like workers have, you know, been abused or like denied medical treatment or whatever. And like we had the same thing early COVID, like meat packing plants, like just like a fucking mess because the housing is trash. There's no access to medical care. It's so like I feel really privileged that I'm a farm worker who like has this like white privilege, but like I just want to draw attention that it's like not just people like me, it's like the whole fucking system's broken in Canada and the US just in general.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I was trying to explain in my comments.
Absolutely. And workers were called essential, but not given the essential services that they need and deserve. Absolutely. Yeah, it was kind of weird and surreal to have that. Our first event was about like kind of building power and solidarity with food system workers. And it was like April 2020. It was like somehow like really, really early in the pandemic. And it was just wild to see how COVID intersected with race and with immigration status and with gender. And it was very wild. I feel like that was a little bit all over the place, but I just kind of wanted to center in the fact that like we wanted to name that this romanticizing of farms and of food is rooted in whiteness, in white experiences, and also kind of trying to misrepresent what the food system looks like. So, you know, not every farm is an agrarian pastoral, like quaint painting of a farm, but there are really real issues with labor and, you know, environmental sustainability and things that kind of radiate outwards as food travels throughout the whole food system. We are going to take a break just for a couple minutes, and we're going to come back, and Gina and Maya are going to share about 2 farms, one local and one in New York.
Welcome back, everybody. So yeah, the next part of this evening, we're going to be talking about a couple examples of BIPOC-led food futures. And the first one is Soulfire Farm, which is a farm located in upstate New York. It was founded in 2010 by Leah Penniman, and it's a Black Indigenous-led community farm. I'm sure some of you have heard of Soulfire Farm. It's gotten quite a bit of attention in the past over 10 years since it's been working in the food system to undo racism. But whenever I sort of like look online and watch another video of Leah Penniman talking, or like look back at her book, which she published, I always learn something new. Yeah, I mean, Soulfire Farm, one of the cool things about it that sticks out to me that I really want to highlight is that it works at all levels of the food system. So for example, it has programs in farmer training for Black and brown growers, reparations and land return initiatives for farmers, food justice workshops for urban youth, doorstep food delivery for food insecure houses. They run a sliding scale CSA, and then also policy education for public decision makers. And so all of these sort of efforts that it runs are all run and led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so representation is really important, and just super inspiring for creating sort of this like next generation of farmers as activists. And Leah Penniman is one of the co-founders of Soulfire Farm, and she wrote the book Farming While Black, Soulfire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. It's a really inspiring book. I recommend it if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet. And Leah Penniman talks a lot about legacies of discrimination in the food system. So legacies that are rooted in institutional racism, including USDA discrimination against Black farmers. And she really focuses her work on reclaiming that narrative and sort of healing BIPOC relationship to the land, as well as being really active in undoing racism in the food system. So I don't really want to like paraphrase too much about like Leah Penniman's whole philosophy. So we're gonna actually watch a short video where we'll get to hear a little bit more straight from Leah Penniman, the founder of Soulfire Farm. So Shayna's gonna play a little vid for us.
There are a few things that make me happier than physically farming. Big, sweaty, kind of brutal tasks. I think I've always known in some form that this farm and this work around connecting people and land needed to exist.
You wanna be free of your anxiety, just so catchy. I think the wind likes it.
My name is Leah Penniman, and I'm the founding co-director at Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York. Soulfire Farm is a Black Indigenous-led community farm that's dedicated to ending racism in the food system and training up the next generation of activist farmers. Between 1% and 2% of farms are Black owned, which is down from a peak of 14% of Black owned farms in 1910. And this is not because Black folks don't want to farm. This is because of a whole legacy of discrimination, of institutional racism. I grew up in a small rural town called Ashburnham, Massachusetts. I'm the oldest of 3, and we were, for most of our childhood, the only brown kids in our entire school. And we experienced just a lot of social exclusion and racial bullying. It ranged from taunting, being called names, to assumptions about our intelligence. The land and the forest were a salvation for me. I attended every single farming conference that I could afford to go to. But by my late teens, early 20s, I started to get disillusioned because I'd look around at these farming conferences and all the presenters were white, and I looked around and there was only a handful of people of color. A mentor of mine said something so important to me at that time. She was just like, look, don't give up. I know that right now it seems like you're out of place, but remember that our ancestors have been farmers for millennia and that our ancestors built the agricultural system of this country on their backs. I was really grateful that she was there and encouraged me to stick with it. My partner Jonah and I were living in the south end of Albany, New York with our then infant children, Nashima and Emmett. And despite our master's degrees and over a decade of farming experience, found it impossible to get fresh food for our children. There were no supermarkets, no farmers markets, no available community garden plots. The only food is a corner store, a liquor store, and a McDonald's. This system of segregation is termed by the government a food desert. To us, there's nothing natural about apartheid. So we call it what it is, it's food apartheid. It comes out of a legacy of redlining and housing discrimination, of divestment from communities of color, and has resulted in the situation today where if you're white, you're 4 times as likely to have a supermarket on your block than if you're black. You're more likely to have diabetes, heart disease, and other diet-related illnesses, not because you don't know how to eat, but because there, is a scarcity of affordable, culturally appropriate quality food that's accessible. And so we work to establish a community garden right on the corner plot near our home. So when our neighbors found out that we knew how to farm, they encouraged us to start the Farm for the People. And the idea for Soulfire Farm was born. We purchased the land in 2006, and it took us 4 years to transform this marginal, degraded, and vacant land into human habitat and suitable farmland. And we opened the farm in 2011 with a small food distribution program that went right to our neighbors in the South End. A couple thousand folks roll through here every year to attend our farm training programs.
The rest of you are just going to contemplate and pray for the strawberries' happy homemaking.
There are 8 of us working here on the farm. We have an amazing team. We have a number of day-long programs and week-long camps for youth who are interested in farming, and a whole lot of community days and workshops on particular skills. It's really whatever our community is asking us for, we do our best to provide. Our most popular is the week-long BIPOC Fire, stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, Farming in Relationship with Earth. We have folks coming from 37 states and 3 countries this year, Spanish and English speakers, young and old. And we spend a week together doing hands-on-the-land training. We have a number of courses on business management, marketing, as well as crop planning. If you count everyone who's gone through any program, we have over 10,000 alumni. We provide ongoing and forever mentorship. We hook folks up with jobs, land, fellowships, and other opportunities. Land is the place where the lynchings, the beatings, the enslavement, the sharecropping took place. And so there's no way to escape the trauma associated with that. And so a big part of what I and we are trying to do at Soulfire is to reach back across the narrative of the hundreds of years of land-based oppression to Cleopatra's, compost piles and the raised beds of the Ovambo people in Namibia, to reach back to the work of Dr. George Washington Carver, creating regenerative agriculture, and Dr. Booker T. Watley with Farm to Table. So to really reclaim the dignity of it is super important. If we can't feed ourselves, we can't truly be free.
All right, so everyone who's part of the tour, just come a little bit closer. We'll go ahead and get.
Cool, thanks, Shayna. We're gonna leave it there with Soulfire Farm, and we're gonna be doing some reflecting on the video that you all just watched in a little bit. But first off, I'm gonna pass it over to Gina, and we are gonna learn a little bit about a local farm here in Seattle.
Thanks, Maya. So similar to what Leah mentioned is that, we've talked a lot about segregation and redlining and food apartheid and how that kind of all is kind of the same side of one layer of oppression. And it also looks like divestments of resources and communities. And I think this group did a really good job of naming so many opportunities to kind of steer the alternative food movement to be something more comprehensive and effective. So we're gonna highlight one more example of an effort that is being done locally in Seattle. It's called Nurturing Roots Farm. Shanna, can you share the screen of yes, thank you. Nurturing Roots. You made such a lovely slide. I just want folks to see it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And similar to what Leah mentioned in the previous video, the legacy of redlining and segregation has created these divestments of resources, which has resulted in, on average, white folks having 4 times more likely of a chance to be within walking distance of a supermarket than Black folks, and naming that diet-related diseases have a very direct correlation to not having access to affordable, culturally appropriate quality foods, and also a lack of access to open spaces, parks, and enrichment opportunities. So, so the alternative food movement needs to have space and offer a narrative for tackling these issues. If we're talking about how to create a better way to bring good food to the people who need it the most. Yeah, so we also have a video highlighting from Naima Clark, the founder herself. So we just let her speak for this wonderful initiative.
Hi, you came to the farm. Yes, you're here. I see. Hi, Spider-Man, you came to the farm.
My name is Naima Clark. I'm executive director at Nurturing Roots Farm on Beacon Hill in South Seattle, and I like to call myself the farm queen. Enjoy your colors. I'll see you soon. Right. Nurturing Roots came to be because of a dream. I wanted to create something for the community, to create a healthy source of food, to create healthy activities, and also find more ways to reconnect to our environments. But a lot of us in the city, we don't have opportunities, you know, to be able to grow, to be able to actually see a farm, and then know what that means to us, and how to kind of take charge of our health. Very important. I for sure didn't know how to be an executive director for a nonprofit, but because people pushed me, I think being able to see people that look like me leading the charge for social justice organizing, and really Reverend Angela just saying, hey, we'll tack it on your rent, don't pay anything extra, you guys can do it. So for me, that's where it started, and it's just continued to grow.
Yeah, so that was just a trailer to a longer video that we're going to show you a little snippet of. You're welcome to watch that on your own time, but we'll share a minute of it that we found.
Social justice prevails by those most affected being incorporated into that solution. But I know there's a lot of ideas that just say, you just need someone to show you the way. It's like, no, we need to show you what works for us. So I think it prevails by, you know, organizations like Nurturing Roots being lifted up and being able to stand on the same stage as Seattle Tilth or Parks and Recreation and band arms, but them actually lifting, you know, me higher. So being able to reach into communities and value the lived experience, being able to see how we're impacted. I think a lot of it's the education piece, but social justice starts with you knowing. You have to understand what's at play, and then you have to understand how you can transition out of it. But definitely building, social justice is building, you know, a brighter, I hate to say brighter future, but building something better than what you've had the opportunity to see. Like a lot of us don't know what it looks like to be a Black farmer, so I had to make it work, you know? So a lot of times you have to know that you may not see it, but it needs to be done, and you know how to do it, so just do it. Trust that instinct.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I think, you know, one of the reasons we are highlighting these efforts, these campaigns, is because the dominant and the alternative food movement has often left out these narratives and voices. And we really want to kind of bring back, so we want to bring up these narratives because they are very current and happening right now. And to also kind of emphasize the fact that, like, these programs are here because they're offering self-sufficiency. They're offering the sense of power over their own food, and something that has been kind of like historically neglected in the dominant and the alternative Oh, sorry. So yeah, Nurturing Roots was founded by Naima Clark in 2016, and they do offer a lot of programming around community building, offering open space for local communities to host events. They, when the pandemic hit, they started doing grow at home veggie boxes, which included so many cool things like an assortment of plants, both edible and non-edible, seeds, compost, pots, gardening tools, and a little card with a little helpful gardening tips, all to really kind of like fill in those gaps for if anyone is very unfamiliar with gardening and growing their own food, and really kind of inspiring that passion for growing and self-sufficiency around food. Yeah, so a lot of neighbors have vouched for how Nurturing Roots has kind of helped them have a more positive sense around the barriers that they experience in the food system. And I encourage everyone to check them out on their social media. They have a lot of instructional videos that they've made, especially because of the pandemic, to encourage folks to take ownership in their food. And a lot of their messaging is on their social media as well. So I encourage folks to kind of check that out.
One thing I just want to add about both Nurturing Roots and Soulfire Farm is just the ways that both farms and their leadership acknowledge that like these, like what the USDA often calls a food desert, and we talked about this more in our past event about food rights and gentrification, but what the USDA calls a food desert is just food apartheid, like Leah Penniman says, of just like, this is not a natural phenomenon, this is intentional divestment in communities of color. And like, it's really cool to see both of these farms pop up to address kind of food security and like historical power issues around food and land in their own communities. Okay, Scott is now going to kind of talk us through of like, how do we, now that we have this information, we know that the food system, the dominant narrative of the food system is very, very whitewashed. We know that there are these really powerful alternative systems. What do we do with that information? I will pass it to Scott.
Thanks. And I'm actually going to ask all of you to talk about that. So we're going to go into breakout rooms in a couple minutes with probably like 3 or 4 of you in a breakout room to chat. And as Shayna said, it's a big complex thing, right? There's all these different problems. You know, we barely scratch the surface of those problems, but there's also all these solutions, and we also barely scratch the surface of all those solutions. And so it'd be great if we go in some breakout rooms and chat about kind of what some of those other solutions are and ways that you can be a part of those solutions. And also maybe if there was something that really interested you in what was covered so far today, maybe something you learned or some little takeaway, or something that really sparked you know, some other experience or other information, that would be great to chat about as well. So yeah, there's lots of problems, but also a ton of really awesome solutions. And we're going to go into breakout rooms, and you can talk about what some of those solutions are and how you as an individual could get involved, or already are involved. Most of you are probably, if you're interested in this, you're probably involved in some way already. And then we'll come back and maybe share what some of those are and talk a little bit more. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so we're going to do about 10-ish minutes in the breakout rooms, and then come back and chat more.
Scott, did you still want to share an example?
Yes. So like one example, as we're thinking, we thought of a lot of different things, but one that I'll share. So I'm the farm coordinator for Solid Ground, and so I buy things like seeds, for instance, from other farmers. So like one really obvious, easy one for me personally and professionally would be to source my seeds a little bit differently, to make sure that the people who I'm buying my seeds from, kind of those purchases line up with my values. And I think that's a really great example. of kind of a consumer-driven solution, and there are a ton of really great consumer-driven solutions out there. But I also would challenge you, in addition to coming up with other consumer-driven solutions, come up with maybe some solutions that are a little bit less consumer-driven and more systemic, if you can think of any. All right.
Yeah, I can open the breakout rooms. We'll come back in 10 minutes.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had wonderful, engaging conversations with each other. Yeah, so I would love to hear, and I'm sure everyone else would love to hear about what you talked about. We have that mural, and there's a couple different ways you can share. So we have that mural, and there's a section on that I think Shayna will probably call everybody who's in that over to, with a bunch of Post-it notes. And you're welcome to share there. You're welcome to share in the chat here. And you're very welcome to just come off of mute and share with your voice. So whichever way you feel the most comfortable, I'd love to hear a couple things. Any thoughts?
I'm just going to share with my voice because it's easier for me and everything, but we had a very interesting conversation in group number 2. And we were talking about how it was Cameron who mentioned something about how the privilege of owning land and having land, and had passed that land from one generation to another one in this country is being mostly a white privilege. And the people who have worked the land as farmers, I would say, are have been people of color, or in this case also Mexicans. So there are a lot of Latino farmers, right? But they don't own land, or they have not owned the land themselves to have it and pass it on to their own family. So there is that inequality there of who has had the privilege of owning the land. And the other thing that I was talking about is how in one of the videos, it really hit me, the whole idea of there is trauma linked with people of color and farming. And I'm not saying people of color are Black or brown, people who have worked the land as not the owners, but as the workers. And how do you build trust again for new generations of kids, or new generations of people, young people who want to go back to doing, or to go and work with farming, knowing that, their ancestors were mistreated or exploited. And yeah, so that's one of the things that I'm kind of very curious about, that link, the trauma linked with working the land because of the history of people of color with the land.
Thanks for sharing that.
I just want to share appreciation for Elizabeth and their question, or her questions and comments, because it just sparks up so much stuff for me. I was also in group 2, so we were chatting it up. But yeah, education is extremely powerful. Telling the full history, getting people's allowing people to fill out their picture of what it means to farm, what it means to be a farmer, what it means to have a relationship with the land. And Elizabeth just talking about the trauma that people have endured on the land, and the trauma of working in the food system in the past and even now. but the trauma that the land has been in, and there is a spiritual connection that some folks have. So it's creating these spaces where people can make those connections that creates the space where we can see the injustice in the food system, and they're going to, thirst and strive for more. And then it's about directing folks to the right kind of outlets through our civic participation and creating those spaces where we can have those relationships with land near home and also around our urban centers.
Absolutely. I think it's really cool how both the farms we shared about today really center spaces for healing, and they'll have they have some days where their farms are, but at Soulfire Farm, they have some days where their farms are open to all people, but a lot of their days are for people of color specifically to kind of be on the farm and try to have try to use that land as healing.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. Sounds like group 2 had a really great deep conversation there. Does anybody else feel up for sharing, either just unmuting yourself or in the chat or on the mural there? I guess I should actually look at the mural to see if anybody has already.
Yeah, I can share it again. I just wanted to see you all while we were talking for a minute, but okay, here's back to the mural. And some of it was Gina writing the notes of what people were saying, which was helpful.
Looks like I'm seeing allowing people to define their own connection to the land, shifting the power in healthcare from provider to client.
Hire BIPOC educators and leaders in nature-based education. I like that.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. Someone learned today another term other than food desert, the food apartheid term. And mentioned that language is very important. Yeah, I think that one's well, with most of those language things, once you learn them, there are things that just seem so innocuous at first, and then you learn better, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a way better term. Food desert makes it sound like a totally naturally occurring thing, but it's not natural at all. I want to, yeah, as someone who has seen the inside of the nature-based education thing, someone added to the hire BIPOC educators and leaders in nature-based education and pay them well, which yeah can go for many of these industries. You see also cultural sensitivity / being inclusive with the narrative of health. I think that's a really big one. That's one that we focus a lot on in our cooking and nutrition classes, like I think was mentioned earlier, about what is healthy, and healthy doesn't mean some 22-year-old skinny white woman doing yoga and eating kale salad. That could be a version of healthy, but there's a lot more versions of health.
Someone shared just that the land wasn't the cause of the trauma, it was the location of the trauma, kind of like Leah Penniman says. I see someone put and then pass over higher up in leadership. Does this mean like promote BIPOC educators and leaders in organizations? Feel free to add more if you want as well.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That was me.
I also see a new one here, advocate for land access for BIPOC farmers. And we are starting to get close to our time here. So I might just kind of mention a couple other ideas. Feel free to keep populating that or putting things in the chat. But a few other ideas, like that one that we talked about at the beginning, is kind of the consumer-led thing. I think the phrase, you know, vote with your fork or vote with your dollar is very problematic in a lot of ways. And also those of us who do have that dollar to vote with might as well put it towards something good. Just make sure it's not the only thing. There's also, in addition to that person put advocating for land access, you can advocate for a whole bunch of different things. You can advocate for everything. So advocating for better farm worker rights, for better pay, for better protections, for all sorts of different things, for food access. There are many, many different ways to advocate. What else here? Oh, also there's donating your money or donating your time. So like those great places. We have a few, I think, that we're going to put in the chat of like places you can get more involved with. So there's like, I know Nurturing Roots here in Seattle does have volunteer days. You can volunteer with them. Oh, there we go. Shayna's zooming in on it. Good job. She's so on top of it. So yeah, volunteering with them. You are also welcome to volunteer with us at Mara Farm, but there's many other places you can volunteer, like Nurturing Roots. Another great one I want to mention is at Mara Farm, there's another group called Salsa de la Vida. They're a group of BIPOC women that are growing food for sale. They have a CSA that they've been doing for a couple of years now, and they would appreciate your purchasing power. Yeah, there's a bunch of other ones in here. I don't need to mention each and every one out loud, but you can kind of see a bunch in the mural there, a bunch of other ideas. All right, I think I'm going to pass it. We only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to pass it over to Shayna for a little closing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing all those too. Yeah, so Scott shared all these ideas too. We also just wanted to just to name, like Scott was just saying, there are some consumer-led and some kind of like institutional-led, and they're all very important. The dominant systems at play want us to think that it's only our consumer-led choices, but it's really the both and so yeah, we'll share these out in the email tomorrow, but Nurturing Roots has a farm day on Sundays. Yes Farm, which is another farm that's part of the Black Farmers Collective, has Saturdays. So if either of those work for you, we will share Mara Farm calendar as well, but we're not like a Black-led or a BIPOC-led organization, although we will be having an affinity day this summer. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. We are definitely not experts in this topic. It's just something that we were thinking about a lot in our work, and we wanted to kind of open that conversation up to volunteers and community members because it's a really important conversation to be having. If you are interested in any of these, we'll send out more information later. We also have a survey for feedback. So if you're like, this was great, that's great. If you're like, this was not great, and here's why, that's even better to help us improve. And I will share the link for it as well. It's also in the mural. But feel free to stay on for the next couple minutes if you have any questions or anything. But I'm just really glad that we had this space together to talk. Thank you so much.